Okay, good day everyone. Welcome to another episode of live streaming in Basic Transfer Pricing Philippines. And I would like to say thank you sa mga nanonood sa atin, sa mga ka-YouTubers natin. Thank you po. And our topic for this afternoon is about transfer pricing documentation. So our topic is very important because recently the BAR, the Revenue Regulations 19-2020 regarding the documentation of related party transactions. This is transfer pricing. And our topic is about documentation. The most important part of transfer pricing is documentation. And how do you document your transactions in order that it can stand scrutiny during the transfer pricing audit. But before we proceed with our documentation, let us first have a review on the what is transfer pricing. So transfer pricing is the pricing of goods and services between related parties. So when we say transfer pricing, there is related parties. Why? Because if there are no related parties, then we don't have or have nothing to talk about transfer pricing. So transfer pricing adopts the arm's length principle as embodied in the OECD Model Tax Convention and also the United Nations Tax Convention. And what is this arm's length principle all about? It was adopted by consensus of the several countries about how to tax these related party transactions. And by adopting this arm's length principle, the principles requires that the related party transaction should be comparable or similar to independent transactions. Because the independent transactions is the true transactions. In the related party transactions, there is an element of control and that influence the pricing of goods and services between related parties. But in the independent transactions, the influence are due to economic forces like the law of supply and demand that affect the price in the market. There is no influence of control. That's why the independent party prices are the true prices. It's the prices in the market. Okay. So in taxing or imposing taxes on these related party transactions, the tax authorities treat its related party as a separate entity for tax purposes. Okay. So it's up to now during the transfer pricing audit, it's up to the taxpayer to prove, to adopt policies or to document business transactions that will show to the tax authority during the transfer pricing audit that the pricing of the goods and services are arm's length or similar to that of related party transactions. So what are the things that the tax authority will require the taxpayer to do? Submit a transfer pricing analysis report. And that transfer pricing analysis report make use of the comparables. Why? Because when we want to show to the tax authority that your pricing is similar, then you will not avoid but compare your pricing with that of the independent party on the same industry, at the same time, or the same period. So let us start with the documentation requirements under Revenue Regulations 2-2013. And our last streaming, we discussed to you the transfer pricing, the transfer pricing guidelines, which encompasses all the related party transactions, and then the transfer pricing methods and the comparability analysis. Now we will discuss with the documentation requirements. Okay? So why are documentation very important? because those are the evidentiary documents to show or to prove that during the transfer pricing audit, the pricing of goods and services between related parties are at par or similar with the independent party transactions. So, why are documentation very necessary? Because taxpayers must demonstrate that their transfer prices are consistent with the arm's length principle, and I have told you what is the arm's length principle. Well, the arm's length principle requires that the independent party, the related party transaction should be similar or comparable to independent party transactions. The main purpose of keeping adequate documentation is for taxpayers to be able to, number one, defend their transfer pricing analysis. No? So, the regulations does not talk about the requirements of the transfer pricing analysis, but here in the documentation provision of revenue regulations to the 2013. But mind you, I am reading to you now the revenue regulations to the 2013 in its provision of documentation. So, defend their transfer pricing analysis. So, what do you mean by this? That there should be a transfer pricing analysis report that should be submitted to the tax authority in order to show that the pricing of these related party transactions are arm's length. Number two, prevent transfer pricing adjustment arising from tax examinations. Why prevent transfer pricing adjustment? Because you have to prove by showing documents that your pricing of goods and services are arm's length, so that there can be no adjustment to be made by the examiner. And number three, support the application for MAP or the mutual agreement procedure. And what is this mutual agreement procedure? This is a remedy or an act available to the taxpayer to apply in advance for the ruling of the mutual agreement procedure on the pricing of its goods and services. So if you have an approved MAP, then you will never be subjected to transfer pricing audit. Mahina.
Sa Facebook to.
Kaya mahina. Sa Facebook, ilan na?
7.
Sa,
Kumati sa inyo sa Facebook.
sino?
Si Miss Gina Rosales.
Si Miss Gina. Believe talaga kay Miss Gina, always live. I-shout out po kay Miss Gina Rosales, no? From Cebu. Accountant din po siya sa Cebu. No? Napakasipag. Shout out. Sino pa yung ibang nandyan?
Wala ma'am siya ng pinag-comment pero may 8 po tayong viewers sa Facebook.
Okay, sa YouTube.
Sa YouTube po ma'am. 7 po.
Okay. So shout out po sa mga viewers, no? Tuloy lang po tayo dito sa transfer pricing. And these are very important, no? Kasi lalo na ngayon mahigpit na yung BIR, and because of the query of the Congress on ABCB, in case ito pa yung nag-trigger na talagang kailangan na nating implement yung transfer pricing in the Philippines, no? Okay, so the third purpose of documentation is to support the applications for MAP, no? So, itong MAP na to, the Mutual Agreement Procedure, saan po ito pinafile? Pinafile po ito sa International Tax Affairs Division, no? Sa ATAD. Doon yan pinafile together with your documentation, the complete transfer pricing analysis report. And then, pag na-approve siya, hindi ka na masubject sa transfer pricing audit for the next 3 years or 5 years, depending of the term or period na ina-applyan. No? So, yun po yung sum up. Okay. Taxpayers who have not prepared adequate documentation may find their application for MAP rejected, or that the transfer pricing issue would be much more difficult to resolve. So ano yun? Transfer pricing issue daw, difficult to resolve. Why? Because you have no documents. So your contention, your allegations will never be accepted because of lack of evidentiary value, because of lack of documents. Okay. So what is the retention requirement for this documentation under Revenue Regulations 2-2013? The retention requirement required by the BAR is also the same with your keeping or retaining the other kind of documents, all other accounting records, no? So the BAR does not require transfer pricing documents to be submitted when the tax return is filed. Such documents should be retained by the taxpayers and submitted to BAR when required or requested to do so. This retention requirement provision has been amended by Revenue Regulations 19-2020 because the documentation requirements are now required to be attached during the filing of the annual income tax return in the form of CD, as clarified in Revenue Memorandum Circular 76-2020. Retention period in general transfer pricing documents must be retained, preserved within the period specifically provided in the tax code as the retention period, unless a different period is otherwise legally provided. No? So, in accordance with the tax code, and how does this tax code require retention of documents for 10 years? No? It is to the best interest of the taxpayer to maintain documentation for purposes of MAP or mutual agreement procedure and possible transfer pricing examination. So it is really very, very important for the taxpayer to maintain documentation. Why? Because in preparation for the transfer pricing audit or for the application of MAP. And what is your advantage if you apply for this mutual agreement procedure? The mutual agreement procedure application is optional. It is not mandatory, but it will help the taxpayer not to be audited for the duration of the MAP. No? This mutual agreement procedures contain some critical assumptions, and once approved by the BIR for a number of years, then that number of years approved, the taxpayer will never be subjected to a transfer pricing audit. No? But if there are critical assumptions that has not been achieved and there are violations on the mutual agreement procedure, then that mutual agreement procedure will be revoked or cancelled, and the taxpayer will be subjected now to transfer pricing audit. The requirement of Revenue Regulations 2-2013 when it comes to documentation is contemporaneousness. What do you mean by that? Oh? The transfer pricing document must be contemporaneous. If it exists or is brought into existence at the time the associated enterprises develop or implement any arrangement that might raise transfer pricing issues, or review this arrangement when preparing tax returns. So, what do you mean by contemporaneousness? No? It should be existing at the time of the contract, or brought into existence at the time the associated enterprises develop or implement any arrangement that might raise transfer pricing issues. So in short, the document should be existing at the time of the transactions. No? It cannot be that the documents will be produced only during the tax audit. No? Sometimes it takes 3 years, 2 years to audit, and that's the time that you make your documentation. No? So it is not allowed. It should be contemporaneous. It should be your documents should be at the time of your business transactions, no? I think ito yung question sa akin ni Ma'am Gina, no? Rosales. Yung meron siyang isang scenario, no, na yung documents nag-lapse yung ilang taon, yung 3 years. No? Palagi ko ito yung answer natin that it should be contemporaneous. It should be at the time that the arrangement or the agreement was approved or implemented. Documentation details. So, under Revenue Regulations 2013, what are the documents required to be submitted during the transfer pricing audit? No? Without the transfer pricing audit, you are not required to present your documents. No? Only under Revenue Regulations 19-2020 that you are going to submit and attach it in your income tax return. No? And what was the date of that? July 25, 2020. So, documentation details. The details of transfer pricing documents include, no? So, ito yung mga example na i-require sa inyo na documentation details, no? Number 1, organizational structure. So, very important po yan. No? Why? Why organizational structure? Because on the organizational structure, if you have related parties abroad, then it should have been shown in the disclosed in the organizational structure report, no, of the company or the related parties. Also, what are the contents of this organizational structure? The relationship of the existing, no, organizations under the same umbrella of the related parties. Number 2, that included in the documentation details, the nature of the business, industry, and market conditions. So, in some cases, you don't have the data about this. There are commercial databases that will help, no? But you have to buy from them the data, and that's very expensive. Controlled transactions. No? So, it will show also the controlled transactions. And then number 4, assumptions, strategies, and policies. So, these are the very important or crucial na factor. The assumptions, what are the assumptions? We have critical assumptions in financing, in accounting, in the balance sheet income statement. No? We have assumptions. And also, the company formulate also strategies and then keep it in the form of policies. No? Okay. So these are the example of documentations, and that was number 4, assumption, strategies, or policies. Number 5, cost contribution arrangement. Okay. So what are these cost contribution arrangements? In some project or in some programs of the group, there is cost contribution arrangement on the share of its related parties in the new project. No? Number 6, comparability, functional, and risk analysis. No? So, comparability, you're going to compare the functional, the risk analysis of the company. No? Selection of the transfer pricing method. So, application of the transfer pricing method, background documents, and index to documents. No? So, these are the basic documentation requirements that you are going to submit during the tax audit. Okay, so what are the penalties? If the provisions of this code are not being followed, so there is an imposition of penalties, and other appropriate sanctions shall be applied to any person who fails to comply with or violates the provisions and requirements of these regulations. So, how much? No, sa pinakamura na penalty sa BAR is 1,000 per violations, no? Okay. Okay. So, we're done with the requirements of the revenue regulations 2-2013, the transfer pricing guidelines of the Philippines, no? So, we have discussed the documentation requirements. Okay, so that was the requirements for revenue regulations 2-2013. Now, let's go to the requirements under revenue regulations 19-2020, no? Okay, so let's now go to the requirements under 19-2020, which is the documentation requirements and the attachment of that requirements or documents. Attach that to the annual income tax return that you already or about to file, no? Because the effectivity of this 19-2020 on the related party transactions, the effectivity is July 25, 2020. So those that would due to file, then they are already covered, especially those ending in fiscal year. Okay. So information returned on transactions with related parties. So this is the most important part, no? So information returned on transactions with related party, the international and or domestic. So this BAR Form 1709 was revised February 2020. Now let's go to page 1. No? So for the calendar or fiscal year, depends na sa inyo, no, how you make your taxable period. Okay. So calendar or fiscal, and then number 2, year ended, and then number of sheet attached. We have part 1 on the background information of this BAR Form 1709, which is the transfer pricing documentation. So number 4, taxpayer identification number, and then RDO code. Taxpayer's name, last name, first name, middle name, or individual, or registered name for non-individual. And then we have the registered address, and then the contact number, the email address, and the zip code. Okay, so very important po yung zip code. Okay, so let's now go to the part 3, details of related party transactions per category. Per category. Excuse me. Okay. So details of transactions with the parent, no? So name of company you are going to disclose, no? So the details of the transactions, name of the company, the address, and then the nature of transaction, kung ano man yun, no? And then the amount or the volume, okay, ng transaction. And then the outstanding balance, if any, and then the terms, no? And then the conditions, the provisions for doubtful debts, no? And then the expense recognized. Okay. So under page 2, we have the letter B, summary of transactions with entities with joint control or significant influence over the entity. Ito na yung mga related parties, no? So the name of the company, the address, nature of transactions. So actually, itong BR Form 1709 are disclosures, no? Siniparate lang sila for easy reference. So amount or volume, the outstanding balance, and then the terms, the conditions, provisions for doubtful debts, and also the expense recognized. Okay. So what are the summary of transactions with the subsidiaries? Letter C. Name of company, address, and then the nature of transactions. Okay. So, paano nyo i-dokumento? Saan manggagaling itong transactions with the subsidiaries? Name of company, the address, and then the nature of transactions. So, how are you going to document this one at saan nyo po ito kukunin? Sa summary of transactions with the subsidiaries, dapat meron kayong special books of accounts na that you maintain, no? So, ilagay nyo doon the name of the company, the address, and then the nature of transactions, no? Because kung wala kayong record, no, na special books of accounts, mahihirapan po kayo dito gumawa ng summary, no? And what happened? Minsan, maraming transactions na hindi na isasama or nawawala. Okay. So, amount, volume, outstanding balance, terms, conditions, provision for doubtful debts, and the expense recognized. Letter D, summary of transactions with associates. Ito naman sa mga associates ito. Name of company, address, nature of transactions, amount or volume, outstanding balance, terms, conditions, provisions for doubtful accounts, and the expense recognized. Letter E, summary of transactions with joint ventures in which the entity is a joint venturer. No? So, joint venturer yung entity. No? Okay, so nakalagay din po dito the name of the company, the address, the nature of transactions, and also the amount or volume, the outstanding balance, the terms, conditions, provision for doubtful debts, and then the expense recognized. No? Why very important pabalik-balik yung provision for doubtful debts and also for the expense recognized? Because we're talking of related parties. And when under the related parties, when you provide for the allowance of doubtful debts, then that should be scrutinized, especially between related parties. No? So, summary of transaction with the key management personnel of the entity or its parent. So, name of spouse, the address, the short-term employee benefits. No? And then we have also post-employment benefits, other long-term benefits, termination benefits, share-based payments, and others. No? So, yun po yung require sa atin under the key management personnel of the entity or its parents. No? Okay, so page 3 na tayo. Information return on transactions with related party transactions, international and or domestic. No? So, hindi lang siya pang local, kasama na international. Summary of transactions with other related parties. We have the name of company, address, place of residence, nature of transactions, amount or volume, no? So outstanding balance, terms, conditions, provisions for doubtful debts and expense recognized. So, pabalik-balik lang talaga yung provision for doubtful debts and the expense recognized. Okay. Other information. Discussion lang to, parang essay to ha. Brief business overview of the ultimate parent company. Brief business overview, functional profile of the taxpayer. Okay. Has there been any change in functional profile of the taxpayer? If yes, please provide details. Has there been any change in the ownership structure of the taxpayer? If yes, please provide details. No? Did the taxpayer undergo business restructuring during the year or the last 5 years? If yes, please provide details. No? So, what do you mean by business restructuring? You merge or you acquire a new company? No? So, did the taxpayer undergo business restructuring during the year or the last 5 years? If yes, provide details. Okay. Do you have pending tax treaty relief application with the BAR or with the tax authority other than of other? If yes, please provide details. Letter G. Do you have an advanced pricing arrangement with your related parties? If yes, please attach copy of the APA. No? Okay, so nakalagay dyan sa dulo, yes or no. This form is signed under the penalties of perjury. And who will sign? Signature over printed name of taxpayer or president or principal officer, authorized representative. No? Okay. So another is the signature over printed name of the treasurer. No? Dalawa sila. Okay. Tayin mo na tong lamig na. At mahina na?
Hindi, okay na.
Ilan na yung nanood?
Sa Facebook po, ma'am, 13.
Okay.
Sa YouTube natin, ma'am, 8.
May nadagdag isa.
Tapos may bumati sa inyo, ma'am, si AC Rachel siguro, ma'am, baliktad kasi yung letter. Hi daw po, ma'am, God bless. Tsaka si Miss Sheila Catalan.
Sige. Shout out po Miss Sheila Catalan at saka Miss Rachel.
Apo, AC Rachel.
Okay, Rachel. Okay. So, shout out po sa inyo and thank you for watching. Saan yan sila sa
Facebook po.
Facebook? Okay. And now we will go to the most important, no? Ito yung transfer pricing documentation under the 2017 OECD transfer pricing guidelines, no? But before that, 5 minutes break lang po. 5 minutes break tayo before ko umpisahan itong transfer pricing documentation by the 2017 Okay, so let's go now to the transfer pricing documentation requirements under the 2017 OECD transfer pricing guidelines. No, ito yung nag-umpisa lang nung 2017, but previous to that on the 2010 OECD transfer pricing guidelines, very broad lang po doon yung requirements ng OECD. No? So dito very specific na po siya. No? So what are the following information that should be included in the master file? Okay lang? Okay.
Naputo lang po sa Facebook.
Okay, so the requirements included in the master file. There are 3 requirements on the documentation. We have the master file, the local file, and the country-by-country reporting. So the following information should be included in the master file. So this, number 1 is the organizational structure, which contains the chart illustrating the multinational enterprises' legal and ownership structure and geographical location of operating entities. So ano yung nandyan sa chart? Doon na yung kung sino yung parent company, the ultimate parent company, the related parties, everybody who are part of the group, nandyan po sa organizational structure. Kasama na yung kanilang geographical location wherever they are situated in the world, and also their structure. No? Kung halimbawa, holding company ba siya, o real estate, financing activity ba siya, o transportation, kung ano yung functions niya, nakalagay na rin po doon. No? The ownership structure, kung 20% ba siya, associate or subsidiaries, whatever. No? Okay. Description of the multinational enterprises businesses. No? So the general written description of the MNE's business, including important drivers of business profit. So ano yung mga important drivers of business profit? Example, halimbawa, monopoly in the market. Sila lang yung available, no competitor in the market. No? Halimbawa, sila lang yung may software, sila lang yung pwedeng mag-license ng ganung exclusivity of products, no? So pwede rin. O kaya sila lang yung may available na materials, controlled nila, no? So those are important drivers of business profits. And the intangibles, no? Yung mga intangibles na meron sila. And then we have the description of the supply chain for the group's 5 largest products and or service offerings by turnover, plus any other products and or services amounting to more than 5% of group turnover. The required description could take the form of a chart or diagram. Bakit sinabi na dito na groups 5 largest products? Because there are groups who have 1,000 products or so many products, no? So ang nilalagay lang sa description is at least the 5 largest products and or services, no? Or yung may products na at least more than 5% ng group turnover. Okay. So also required is the list and brief description of important service arrangements between members of the NME group other than research and development services. Bakit other than research and development services? Kasi nakabukod po yung requirements sa research and development services, no? So ano itong mga service arrangement, no? So halimbawa, sa Pilipinas, outsourcing siya yung customer service, no? Doon sa iba, marketing, no? Including a description of the capabilities of the principal locations, providing important services and transfer pricing policies for allocating service cost and determining prices to be paid for intragroup services. So how are you going to formulate or make a transfer pricing policies, no? Nandyan yan. Saan yan ginagawa? Usually sa board, no? During the board meeting, no? Doon pino-formulate yung mga transfer pricing policies, no? Sa mga MANCOM, no? Management Committee meetings. So, for allocating service cost and determining prices to be paid for intra-group services. What is this intra-group services? These are the services concluded or provided between the groups. No? Another is the description of the main geographic markets for the group's products and services that are referred to in the second bullet point above. No? So ito yung description ng geographic markets for the group's products. No? Saan ba siya? Nasa Asia Pacific ba siya? Nasa China? Nasa Philippines? Nasa India? No? Kasi magkaiba yan na klase ng geographic markets. No? Imagine sa India, they have more than 1 billion customers. No? Sa Pilipinas, ilang milyon ang customers dito. Sa Japan. No? So magkaiba ang geographic markets. Brief written functional analysis describing the principal contributions to value creation by individual entities within the group. No? So ito yung functional analysis. What are the functions ng bawat members of the groups? No? And their principal contributions to value creation by individual entities within the group. The key functions performed, ano ba yun sila? Warehousing, manufacturing, retailing, no? So yun yung mga key functions performed. The important risk assumed and the important assets used. Ano ba yung mga risk assumed niya? Sa kanya ba yung warranty, no? Na pag may nasira na mga produkto, sila yung magwawaran, sila yung magbibigay ng post-service. And then the important assets used, especially if asset-oriented po yung functions or yung company. No? Sinabi natin asset-oriented, it requires investment in assets in order that the company will operate. Halimbawa na lang, sa manufacturing, ano ba yung klase ng mga makina na kailangan mo so that makapag-manufacture ka? No? So iba-iba yan, kasi iba-ibang industry, iba-ibang klase ng manufacturing, iba-ibang klaseng makina din po yung kailangan or assets. No? Description of important business restructuring transactions, acquisitions, and divestitures occurring during the fiscal year. So, kasama din po na i-disclose natin. Actually, disclosures ito eh. Kasi description, no? Important business restructuring, the transfer ba siya ng location? Nag-restructure ba siya ng corporate assets niya or yung equity niya? Nag-issue ba siya ng additional na shares capital? Merger ba siya? Nag-consolidate o bumili siya ng bagong company? No? Acquisitions and divestitures, nagbenta ba siya? Yung binenta niya? Nagbenta ba siya ng mga assets? Occurring during the fiscal year. No? So yun yung description of important business restructuring transactions, acquisitions, and divestitures occurring during the fiscal year. Pag gumagawa kayo ng mga ganitong klaseng documentation, be sure na wala kayong nakakalimutan o nakakaligtaan. Why? Kasi that will affect the accuracy or the reliability of your report. Especially if you are doing transfer pricing analysis report, no? Be sure that everything has been disclosed, no? Or included in the documentation. Okay? So, multinational enterprises intangibles as defined in Chapter 6 of these guidelines. When we see these guidelines, we mean the 2017 OECD transfer pricing guidelines. No? A general description of the M&E's overall strategy for the development. So, tingnan nyo na lang na nandito din yung comparability factors, no? Kanina, assets, risk, ngayon dito yung strategies, no? So, general description of the M&E's overall strategy for the development, ownership, and exploitation of intangibles, in-exploit yung intangibles, no? Including a location of principal, research and development facilities, and location of research and development management. These are very important. Why? Because ito yung mga functions na to, these are very crucial and usually, yan ang mahal, yan ang maraming gastos, no? Kaya pinapadisclose, nilalagyan na ng brief description. A list of intangibles or groups of intangibles of the M&E group that are important for transfer pricing purposes and which entities legally own them. Actually, ito yung contribution ko sa world, no? Yung sabi ko, we have to protect the legal owners as against the beneficial owners, no? Kasi kawawa yung legal owner, beneficial owner lang nakikinhabang, no, sa intangibles. List of intangibles or groups of intangibles of the M&E group that are important for transfer pricing purposes and which entities legally own them. Sino bang entities yung legally own them? No? So that should be properly credited kasi kung siya talaga yung may-ari, dapat nasa kanya yung share ng royalties. No? But minsan amaze ka or ma-surprise ka because siya yung legal owner pero hindi sa kanya napupunta yung royalties. No? Ito yung mga instances na ang sabi diyan ng korte, recharacterization of the transaction. I-recharacterize mo. Ibig sabihin, i-reclassify mo. Ilagay mo siya talaga sa tamang classification. Kasi kung binago nila yung classification or in short, the substance is different from form. So in that case, i-reclassify mo siya para yung substance over form pareho. No? Okay, so the list of important agreement So, list of important agreement among identified associated enterprises related to intangibles, no? So, ano itong mga important agreements, no? Kaya nga, sinabi ko na sa inyo, talagang na sama talaga dito sa documentation yung comparability factors, no? So, balikan natin what are the 5 comparability factors. We have the nature, characteristics of goods and properties, tangible or intangible. We have, number 1 yan. Number 2, the functions, assets, and risk. No? Number 2. Number 3, the economic conditions. Number 4, the business strategies. And number 5, the contractual terms or the agreements. So ito na yun. Yung mga comparability factors na yan, pinapa-document po lahat sa atin. No? Kaya dito meron na kayong mga pinapagawa na summary, no? Summary ng documents or ng description. No? So, list of important agreements among identified associated enterprises related to intangibles, including cost contribution arrangements, principal research service agreements, and license agreements. So, this pertains to agreements. And when we say agreements, we mean contracts. No? May mga kontrata yan. Kahit nasabihin mo pa na related parties sila lang din yung nag-uusap. But kailangan ang kanilang agreements should be in writing at saka the provisions in their agreements should also be arm's length. No? Kasi pag hindi arm's length yan, then there is a room for adjustment. Excuse me. Okay. So, very important po yung license or yung agreements, no? Or yung contractual terms na nakalagay sa agreements, yung mga provisions doon, they should be checked. Kasi pagdating ng transfer pricing audit, posible na yung mga nakalagay doon, na mga provisions doon, titingnan yan if they conform with the arm's length principle. Huh? So, general description of the group's transfer pricing policies related to research and development and also the intangibles. No? Description ng transfer pricing policies na intangibles. No? What are these intangibles? These intangibles are the value drivers, no, ng companies. Ito yung mga patent, copyrights, property to sila ng company. general description of any important transfers of interest in intangibles among associated enterprises during the fiscal year concerned, including the entities, countries, and compensation involved. Ito yung gumagawa sila ng IP hub, no? Intellectual property hub, tapos transfer nila doon yung lahat ng intangibles nila, and then the group will pay to that IP hub, IP company, lahat ng royalties nandoon na. And then this is a source of transfer pricing issue talaga, no? And then ito yung IP company nila, register in a tax haven countries or in a country na napakababala ng tax. Why? The purpose of this is really to save payment of taxes. No? To save or to avoid payment of taxes. Okay. So general description of any important transfers of interest in intangibles among associated enterprises during the fiscal year concerned, including the entities, countries, and compensation involved, no? Especially pagka multinational, it involves different countries. Kaya pagka yung case ng Amazon versus the Commissioner of Internal Revenue or the IRS, that pertains to the valuation of intangibles kasi tinransfer ng Amazon ang kanyang mga assets kasama na yung mga intangibles niya to the company in Ireland, no? And then the transfer is undervalued, no? So sabi ng IRS, napakaliit yung valuation ng mga assets na tinransfer. So dapat ganito, meron siyang sariling valuation, but pagdating po sa korte, panalo ang Amazon. Why? Because they go back to the definition of intangibles at sabi ng definition, hindi kasali yung mga residual assets, yung mga list of customers, yung mga growth expansion, yung mga intangibles na isinama doon, no? So panalo ang Google, ang Amazon at that time, no? Kasi wala pang batas ang IRS or ang US na defining the intangibles as all-encompassing. Kasi pag sinabi mo kasing intangibles, wala namang limit yan eh. Sobrang laki ng scope ng intangibles, no? Okay. Yung pinag-aawayan talaga dyan, usually is the compensation eh. The compensation involved. Kasi sabi ng taxpayer, sabi ng multinational companies, ito dapat yung valuation for tax purposes. Sobrang liit. Sabi naman ng tax authority, ito dapat sobrang laki naman. So ano sabi ng court usually, pagdating sa jurisprudence, ina-adjust niya pareho, no? Multinationals intercompany financial activities, ano requirement for documentation, no? For your information, meron na tayong 2020 na transfer pricing guidelines ng financial transactions, no? Siguro isama ko yan na i-live streaming natin yan sa next na meeting, no? Although we are planning na magkaroon po tayo ng free seminar on transfer pricing, no? I-pre-registered po natin para mas marami po yung makikinabang, no? Magkaroon po tayo ng pre-registration. So in that case, sa pagka pre-registration at na-evaluate namin talaga kung sino uma-attend, then we can issue to you your certificate, no? Certificate of attendance, no? Pero every time, ini-evaluate din natin yung attendance at saka kino-confirm, no? Kaya mayroon tayong pre-registration. Okay. So MN's intercompany financial activities, general description of how the group is financed, including important financing arrangement with unrelated lenders. Because usually, sa multinationals, meron silang related party na lenders, no? Yung nagpapautang sa kanila, related parties din nila. Performing financing, giving financing aid or services to the other groups or to the members of the group, no? Identification of any members of the multinational enterprises group that provide a central financing function for the group, including the country under whose laws entities organized and the place of effective management of such entities. So how do we discover, how do we know the issues or the transfer pricing issues pagdating na sa financing functions, no? Yun po yung February 2020 na transfer pricing audit guidelines ng financial transactions, no? Na kasama natin yan na i-discuss sa inyo doon sa pre-registered natin na seminar, no? So the identification of any members of the multinational entities group that provide a central financing function for the group. So ano to central financing function? So if the multinational has 500 members, no, the group, so they have a central financing, meaning this one company engaged only in financing the whole group, no? Okay, so you have to disclose the law and the entity, the country where that financing company that provides central financing to the whole group, where is that company located or in what country? And then nasaan yung place of effective management? Why? Sometimes naka-register lang siya sa isang bansa pero the effective management is not there, no? So you have to disclose also the place of effective management kung nasaan ba talaga. General description of the MNE's general transfer pricing policies related to financing arrangement between associated enterprises, no? So general transfer pricing policies. So what are the policies? What are the amount charged when the central financing company extend loans to the members, no? So how much ang charges, no? Or the cost of money na pinapahiram doon sa mga subsidiaries or the members of the group. MN's financial and tax positions, no? So the multinational enterprises annual consolidated financial statement. Consolidated ito. So it includes the related parties. Consolidated financial statement for the fiscal year concerned if otherwise prepared for financial reporting, regulatory, internal management, tax, or other purposes. So remember na yung report, no? Yung financial statements. Saan yan nag-uumpisa? Saan yung unang pinapatatakan palagi? The BAR. Why? Kasi ang BAR is the user of this financial statement. Bakit siya user? Kasi after po siya sa tax, no? Kaya nga mayroon tayong transfer pricing because of also how this related party transactions pay their taxes, no? List and brief description of the MNE group's existing unilateral advance pricing agreements and other tax rulings related to the allocation of income among countries, no? So dito sa atin wala pa tayong APA na regulations na ginawa or yung advance pricing arrangements, no? Kasi the last time kami na pumunta sa national office sa ITAD before yung COVID, no? Nakasama ko yung transfer pricing expert from Japan. Wala pa silang guidelines on the APA or the advance pricing arrangement. Transfer pricing documentation or the local file. The following information should be included in the local file. So we are done with the master file. Ngayon ito namang local file. No? So for the local entity, description of the management structure of the local entity, local organization chart, description of the individuals to whom local management reports, and the country or countries in which such individuals maintain their principal offices. No? So, yung local entity, gagawa lang siya ng description, no, ng structure niya, and then yung local organization chart niya, and then the description of the individuals to whom local management reports, no? And the countries in which such individuals maintain their principal offices. So, yung local entity mismo, pag gumawa siya ng local files niya, nakalagay din dito yung disclosures ng mga countries kung nasaan yung management, no, ng parents or na related parties. So ano to? Disclosure na po to sa BR para hindi mahirapan yung mga examiners during the audit, no? So another requirements is the detailed description of the business strategies pursued by the local entity, including an indication whether the local entity has been involved in or affected by business restructurings, no? Kasi ano ba yung business restructurings? Pagka sinabi mo mahirang business restructuring, red flag na kaagad dyan, titingnan mo bakit sila nag-restructure and what are the advantages ng ginawa nila restructuring, no? Or intangible transfers in the present or immediately past year and an explanation of those aspects of such transactions affecting the local entity, no? So, mahaba ang description ito. Kasi explanation on those aspects of such transactions affecting the local entity. And also the key competitors, no? So I have to disclose who are your key competitors, especially sa yung malalaki na yung market share, no? Yung mahirap lang dito, yung new entrance to the market na wala pa siyang market share, and then nakapwesto na yung mga competitors niya na mas nauna na sa kanya. So, dyan sila nahihirapan. Kaya nag-a-adapt yung mga new entrant to the market. Gumagawa sila ng mga strategies, no? Control transactions. For each material category of control transactions in which the entity is involved, provide the following information. So, ito yung mga information sa control transactions. Description of the material control transactions. So, what are the material control transactions? Example, halimbawa, the parent company is the nasa retailing, no? And then, ang subsidiary niya, ginawa niya dito sa Pilipinas, mananahi ng mga garments na kukunin niya at kasi reselling siya, so yun ang binibenta niya, no? So ano itong mga material control transactions? The parent company is the supplier of the raw materials na ginagawa ng subsidiary. And then, yung parent company na naman ulit, siya rin yung bumibili ng mga damit na tapos na ginawa naman ng subsidiary dito sa Pilipinas. So ano ang tawag doon? The contractual terms, no? The transaction has only one supplier and has only one buyer, no? So anong tawag diyan? Material control transactions, no? Kahit material control transactions siya, wala nang ginawa yung sinabing manufacturer, doing services na lang to the parent company, no? So material control transactions. Procurement of manufacturing services, purchase of goods, provision of services, loans, financial and performance guarantees, licenses of intangibles, and the context in which such transactions take place, no? So, ito na, material control transactions. So, nandiyan na lahat. No? Wala ka nang gagawin kung di bigyan mo siya ng explanations, no? Okay. So the amount of intragroup payments, so another explanation. The amount of intragroup payments and receipts for its category of involving the local entity, no? So kasama na yung payments and receipts for products and the services, the royalties, interest, broken down by tax jurisdiction of the foreign payer or recipient. Mamaya may matrix tayo dyan, no? Para hindi kayo malito. Although, also, the identification of associated enterprises involved in its category of controlled transactions and the relationship among them. Okay. Copies of all material intercompany agreements concluded by the local entity. So what are the, actually, required ito sa 1709, yung sabi natin na attachment to the annual income tax return submitted to the BAR for related party transactions or documentation. You have to fill up that form 1709 and you have to attach all the agreements concluded by the entity. No? So, yung iba nag-react na, sobrang dami, paano namin to i-attach, no? Nung sabi ng BAR under RMC 76-2020, since very voluminous, halimbawa yung papel, is scan copy lang siya, soft copy, and then the DVD-R, yun ang isubmit po sa BAR. The detailed comparability and functional analysis of the taxpayer and relevant associated enterprises with respect to its documented category of controlled transactions, including any changes compared to prior years. Okay, so yung comparability and functional analysis ng taxpayer. Indication of the most appropriate transfer pricing method with regard to the category of transaction and the reasons for selecting that method. So ito na yung sinasabi ko na nandito na yung transfer pricing analysis, no? Kasi ano to, appropriate transfer pricing method. So hindi mo man na magawa itong appropriate na transfer pricing method if you will not compare, no? So with regard to the category of transaction, and the reasons for selecting the method. Yun yung sabi ko sa inyo, na dito sa Pilipinas, we have what we call as the best method rule. And what is that best method rule? You have to apply all the 5 methods of transfer pricing, and then you have to recommend the best method, no, applicable to your transactions. Okay. Indication of which associated enterprise is selected as the tested party, if applicable, and an explanation of the reasons for this selection. No? So, bakit siya yung pinili na tested party, or siya yung tiningnan kung tama ba, arm's length ba yung pricing ng transactions. No? Summary of the important assumptions made in applying the transfer pricing methodology. So ito yung mga assumptions, no, sa transfer pricing methodologies. Okay. So if relevant, an explanation of the reasons to performing a multi-year analysis. No? So bakit kailangan yung multi-year, more than one taxable year na analysis? Kasi pagka multi-year, doon mo makita yung trending, doon mo makita yung increase, decrease, no, during the year. So mapipredict mo na ngayon, ma-forecast mo na yung future. A list and description of selected comparable uncontrolled transactions, internal or external, if any, and information on relevant financial indicators for independent enterprises relied on in the transfer pricing analysis, no? So, ano ba yung mga financial indicators ng independent enterprises? No? So, including a description of the comparable search methodology and the source of such information. Okay. So, pati yan pinapalagay sa atin, no? Yung mas source ng information, no? Description ng comparable search. No? Description of any comparability adjustments performed and an indication of whether adjustments have been made to the results of that tested party. No? So the comparable and controlled transactions, or both. No? So kung meron bang comparability adjustments na ginawa. No? Description of the reasons for concluding that relevant transactions were priced on an arm's length basis based on the application of the selected transfer pricing method. So you have to describe, no, your reasons. Summary of financial information used in applying the transfer pricing methodology. No? So ano yung mga financial information? Okay? So, copy of existing unilateral and bilateral, multilateral APAs and other tax rulings to which the local tax jurisdiction is not a party and which are related to control transaction described above. No? Sila yung may mga advanced pricing arrangement na. No? Usually yan bilateral, no? Involve yung dalawang countries. No? Okay. Ano yung purpose ng APA? No? Advanced pricing arrangement, ito yung advance mo na siyang i-file and then i-determine na parang during the deliberation ng APA mo, parang sinubject ka na rin sa transfer pricing audit. Financial information. Annual local entity financial accounts for the fiscal year concerned. No? So if audited statements exist, they should be supplied, and if not existing, unaudited statements should be supplied. No? So, kasi walang audited statement, kaya unaudited. Okay. So information and allocation schedule showing how the financial data used in applying the transfer pricing method may be tied to the annual financial statements. No? Summary schedules of relevant financial data for comparables used in the analysis and the sources from which that data was obtained. So very important po talaga yung sources ng data. No? Sa financial data for comparables. Okay. So, we have now the model template for the country by country. No? So, ano yung gagawin natin pagka country by country? This is the matrix. No? Table 1, overview of allocation of income, taxes, and business activities by tax jurisdiction. So, tax jurisdiction, unrelated party, related party, total. Yan yung mga revenues. And then, name of M&E group fiscal year concerned. No? Okay. Income tax accrued, current year. No? Stated capital. Accumulated earnings. No? How much? The number of employees. And then the tangible assets other than cash and cash equivalents. No? So, kasama po siya sa disclosures. No? Okay. Table 2 is the list of the constituent entities of the NMA group included in its aggregation per tax jurisdiction. So, ito yung mga member of the groups ng MNE na kasama sa aggregation or sa total per tax jurisdiction. So, tax jurisdiction, sa country ba yan? So, pag sa Pilipinas, ano yung jurisdiction natin dito, no? The BAR. No? So dito tayo sa Pilipinas, dito sakop ang BAR, no? So tax jurisdiction, the constituent entities resident in the tax jurisdiction, and then the tax jurisdiction of organization or incorporation if different from tax jurisdiction of residents, no? Okay, so name of the M&A group fiscal year concerned, the main business activities. No? So, mamili kayo dyan. I-check nyo lang kung ano yung main business activities niya. But be sure na pag nag-check kayo, gumagawa kayo ng ito, local files, no? Anong gagawin natin? Be sure na itali natin to sa ibang documents. Halimbawa, meron tayong nilagay dito na holding or managing intellectual property, purchasing, procurement. So, see to it that yung kanilang mga documents magtatali at yun din yung kanilang mga main na business activities. No? Table 3, additional information. Name of the M&E group, the fiscal year concerned. No? And then, ano yan? Explanation. Please include any further brief information or explanation you consider necessary or that would facilitate the understanding of the compulsory information, no, provided in the country-by-country report. Okay, so yun po yung requirements ng documentation, no, sa 2017 na OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines. So, nabasa ko na sa inyo the requirements ng documentation under the 2017 OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines. And then nabasa ko rin sa inyo yung documentation din po sa local, no? Country by country report. And then the yung mga additional information that are also required, no? So marami yung mga yan. At dapat, ang sabi ko sa inyo, reconcile nyo siya sa ibang documents. No? Kasi hindi pwede na nakalagay sa explanation nyo, sa additional information nyo, holding company, yung pala sa registration sa BIR, iba. No? So, see to it na related po sila or like verified or i-confirm mo na hindi sila magkakalayo. Dapat magkatugma sila with the other documents. Okay. So, tapos po tayo sa yung OECD Model Tax Convention natin, no, na documentation requirements. So, dito naman tayo sa next natin na topic, no? But before that, let's have a 10 minutes break na lang po. 10 minutes break. Naka-live na?
Apo.
Sige. Okay. So let's go back to our discussions on transfer pricing documentation, no? Okay. So, yung isa pang source ng documentation that we are going to discuss is coming from the Ramo 1-2019 ng BIR. Ito yung Revenue Audit Memorandum Order 1-2019, no? So, ano po yung ni-explain dito sa Ramo na to? Ito yung transfer pricing audit guidelines na gagawin ng examiner during the audit, no? So, it is known to everyone na during the audit, ano ang hinahanap? Puro yan documentations, no? Puro yan dokumento, no? Kasi ano yung i-audit ng examiner kung walang dokumento? Okay? So, the revenue officers need to study several sources of information. So, since kailangan niya ng mag-audit, ano yung mga information na kailangan may dokumento na hihingin po niya sa taxpayers, no? So, number 1, organizational chart of the taxpayer, under audit, and structural chart of the group. So, kung mapapansin niyo, this is required in the master file, no? Doon sa 2017 OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines, nandoon ito, no? The organizational chart of the taxpayer under audit and the structural chart of the group, no? Okay. So, and then number 2, the list of all employees, the job descriptions, and the authorities of the employees, no? So, yun yung ano yung mga job descriptions, ano yung mga ginagawa ng mga empleyado. Why? Paano mo i-relate itong list of employees and the job descriptions? Especially if the company is doing service, no? Yun ang binibenta niya. So, kung ang company is doing service business, ano yung functions niya na makikita mo in substance? Yan yung descriptions ng mga trabaho na ginagawa ng kanyang empleyado. Why? Because the company itself cannot deliver service sa customer. Sino ang nagde-deliver ng service sa customers? The employees, no? So, kaya dito, hinahanap yung job descriptions ng mga employees para malaman mo kung anong klaseng serbisyo ang ginagawa ng company na binibenta niya sa kanyang mga customers, no? Okay. Number 3, na requirements is the audited financial statements. They are very important, no? Audited financial statements. Ano yung mangyayari doon sa mga those who are filing financial statements pero tentative, no? The tentative financial statements, if may letter authority ka na and it becomes final, no? Bakit? Kasi sabi mo lang tentative, pero yung tentative mo naging final na kasi wala ka namang pina-file na bagong financial statements. So, pagka na-issuean ka na ng letters of authority, the tentative financial statements will be the basis now for audit. No? Di ka pwedeng magreklamo. Bakit? Kasi kung sinabi mong tentative, dapat nag-file ka ng final. Wala ka namang pinal na final. Kaya yung tentative, naging final. Okay, number 4, segmented financial statements. Segmented both by functions and by independence of transactions. So, ito na. Pag sinabi natin segmented, ilagay mo talaga siya ng as to the functions, no? Halimbawa, ano yung function niya? Manufacturing. So, ano ba yung financial statements niya? Sales, less cost of sales, yung mga expenses niya. Doon sa manufacturing na yan, kung yan ang functions niya. And then, ang functions niya is delivery. So, magkano ba yung sales at saka mga charges niya doon sa delivery? The income and expense. No? So, nandun ka na sa by category na segmented financial statements. No? Ano pa? Ano by independence of transactions? So, depende pa yan sa transactions kung ano yung ginagawa niya. Wherein, you can also file segmented financial statements. No? Number 5, global pricing policy documentation. So what is this global pricing policy documentation? Siguro, ito yung mga price of the same goods or commodities na binebenta mo sa mga related parties transactions mo all over the world, no? If you try to look at the most controversial audit transfer pricing case decided ever in court, ito yung sa GlaxoSmithKline, ito yung global pricing policies nila which were used as the internal comparables na dito sila nagkaroon ng adjustment. Why? Kasi yung global pricing policy nila magkaiba, hindi pare-pareho, no? So doon pa lang mayroon ng source of comparability. So ano yun? Yung active ingredients ng sellable nila na product, which is the Santac, which is subjected to transfer pricing audit. Sa dami-dami ng kanilang product, isa lang product lang ang sinubject sa transfer pricing audit. Why? Kasi yun ang the most sellable sa Canada, no? So, anong nangyari? Yung active ingredients na yan, binibenta nila all over the world through related parties, iba-ibang company. Halimbawa, isa nag-supply sa Egypt, nandun sa Europe, nandun sa Canada, nandun sa Africa, nandito sa Asia, yung iba. Lahat yan sold by a related party to another related parties at magkaiba-iba yung presyo, no? So, kaya tinitingnan dito at tinitingnan, pinapasamit sa atin yung global pricing policy documents all over the world para ma-compare at makita mo kung pareho ba o bakit magkakaiba ang presyo, no? Why? Because we will apply the arm's length principle in transfer pricing. Ano yung arm's length principle? Transactions, commercial and financial transactions between related parties should be similar or at par with the independent party transactions. So makikita mo ngayon na ito yung kanilang global pricing policy, pare-pareho ba? Within the group lang, bakit magkakaiba na? No? Okay. So yun yung hindi kayang ipaliwanag ng GlaxoSmithKline. Na sa kanila pa lang, bakit magkaiba yung presyo ng active ingredients nila coming from the same source, hindi na pare-pareho yung presyo. No? So ano yung kanilang pricing policies? Licensing contracts for intangible assets to recognize the parties that own intangible assets and identify payments receipt of royalty to or from related parties, no? Kasi hindi pwede na ipagamit mo, use mo yung intangibles doon sa related party mo na walang bayad. Then that is not arm's length. Why? Kasi in the arm's length principle na sabi natin, we have to treat the related party as independent party. Sa independent party, pag ginamit mo yung software ng isang company, you have to pay for the royalties. Kaya dito, ang hinahanap dito, pag ginamit mo na yung intangible assets, nag-license ka ng software, dapat may royalty payment ka, no? Babayad ka kasi ginamit mo. And that is the arm's length transactions. Bayaran mo kasi ginamit mo, no? So, licensing contracts for intangible assets, hahanapin din po kailan yung i-present, no? And also the transfer pricing documentations, no? So, marami yan. Transfer pricing documentation, kasama na po dyan yung transfer pricing analysis report and the indices or yung mga attachments niya, no? So, yun po yung transfer pricing documentation na sinasabi. At ano-ano yung mga transfer pricing documentation na yan based on the comparability factors na dapat i-document mo. So, balikan natin ulit yung 5 comparability factors. We have the nature or characteristic of goods and services, whether tangible or intangible. So, how are you going to document that? No? Yung nature. Sa nature, makukuha mo yan sa mga certificate of registration niya with the regulatory companies. No? Nandoon yung nature. Kasi kung mag-deviate yan doon sa mga licenses niya, sa mga permits niya, then magiging illegal yung kanyang business. No? So, yun yung related party or transfer pricing documentation na ipiprepare. No? So, ano pa yung mga comparability factors natin na pangalawa? The functions, assets, and risks. So, how are you going to document that? may mga contracts or mga kontratas or agreements, no? And then sa assets and the risk, sa assets, makikita mo dyan yung acquisition niya, saka saan siya kumuha ng pera para ma-acquire niya yung assets. Or, kung hindi man niya na-acquire, nirerentahan ba niya yan at a fair consideration galing sa related parties, no? So, yun yung sa assets. How about the risk, no? So, yung risk, di ba sabi natin pagka ang isang activity is high risk, dapat high rewards, no? Eh, bakit high risk tapos walang rewards, no? So, hindi siya arm's length. No? So, yun po yung dapat i-document, no? And then, next is the economic conditions. So, how are you going to document economic conditions? Just like sa nangyari this year na nagkaroon ng pandemic, no? This is a public knowledge. Kaya nga yung nag-require ang EC, nagagawa pa ang CPA ng sworn statement na na-delay siya sa paggawa ng financial statements dahil sa pandemic. Then, hindi rin yun nagtagal, pinatanggal din nila kaagad yung requirements. Why? Kasi pandemic is a public knowledge. Bakit kailangan mo pa gumawa ng sworn statement? That is redundant or topsy-turvy na requirements. Why? Public knowledge yan eh. Bakit kailangan kapag gumawa ng ng affidavit, no? Okay. So, that is the economic conditions. So, how are you going to document economic conditions, no? So, nandiyan yan sa mga news, no? Sa mga news clippings. And then we have the business strategies and then the contractual terms. So, lahat yan naka-document. Sa contractual terms, madali lang yan because ano yung documentation mo dyan, the contracts, no? Okay. The business strategies, how are you going to document that? Business strategies approved during the board meeting, approved during the MANCOM, no? Okay. So, the revenue officer should focus on the following activities in performing FAR analysis. So, anong FAR analysis? This is the functions, assets, and risks. So, paano daw mag-concentrate dyan ang revenue officers or the examiner, no? Identify the significant material economically relevant functions performed by the taxpayer. So, i-identify mo yung material functions performed by the taxpayer. And then we have to identify significant material economically relevant functions performed by the taxpayer, including design, no? So these are the functions, no, na ginagawa niya. Design, processing, assembly, research and development, sale and distribution, purchase, provision of services, marketing, promotion, transportation, financing, and management, and other related activities. No? So, i-identify niya, no, the relevant functions performed. No? Because along the way, if you identify this material functions of the taxpayers, no, ang ma-identify mo dyan later on are the transfer pricing issues. Okay. Number 2, identify the significant functions performed based on the following. No? So, ito na. Transfer pricing documentation and or FAR analysis form. No? So, ngayon meron na itong 1709, no? Yan yung ayun yung transfer pricing documentation natin. Or related party transactions, yun yung tinatawag ng sa PAS, no, sa Philippine Accounting Standards 24. Transfer pricing documentation and or FAR analysis form. No? And then the taxpayers' financial statements and then the organizational chart. Number 3, prepare questionnaire needed for interviews with key personnel that are wala na, kulang. Okay. Conduct review and analysis of accounting data, interviews, plant tours, and site visitations. Ang dami mo makikita pag ikaw yung auditor. Pagka ginawa mo to yung mga site visitations, marami kang makikita, no? Work with the taxpayers to identify key personnel for interview, site, or tours. Work with taxpayers to identify plan and site for tour. No? So, there are companies na very strict. Kung hindi ka manghingi ng permit, hindi ka pwedeng makapasok sa kanilang mga premises kasi napakahigpit nila. No? So, you have to work with the taxpayers. No? And then identify their key personnel for interview. There are taxpayers na nagpapa-interview ng key personnel. Meron ding iba na hindi. Okay. Okay, so work with the taxpayers to identify plan and site for tours, no? So especially kung factory yan, manufacturing company, pag nagpunta ka doon sa site nila, makikita mo paano talaga sila nagpa-process ng kanilang mga product. No? Kaya ako tuwang-tuwa ako during my time na nag-audit ako, talagang pinupuntahan ko sa site. No? So iba-iba yung makikita mo, iba't ibang klase ng industries. No? Yung pinakamahirap, yung akit kami ng bundok kasi yung titingnan are the quarry. Yung mga quarries dito sa Montalban, sinisira yung mga bundok, ginagawang mga buhangin na ginagamit na construction materials, no? So, matagal yun. No? Kasi lakad lang, walang sasakyan. Okay, so yun yung site tours na makita mo kapag pumunta ka dun sa site nila. No? Puro mga equipments, tapos ginigiling yung mga bato, no? Ginagawang buhangin. So, yun yung makikita pag nag-tour ka. Sa iba naman, yung mga factory, kikita mo yung processing ng mga goods doon. No? Pag pumunta ka naman sa Sugar Central, makikita mo sa mill site nila, kikita mo pa paano ginagawa yung sugar, no? From sugarcane. So, pagka nakita mo kasi kung anong ginagawa, maintindihan mo maigi yung functions, no? Anong purpose ng examiner na pumupunta sila sa mga side tours? To understand better the business, the economic activities. Okay. Work with the core members to prepare for interviews and tours, no? Sino yung mga core members mo during the audit? Oh? Kasi usually sa audit, sa mga large taxpayers especially, tatlo ang examiner, isa ang supervisor. No? So sila yung mga core members sa grupo. No? Consider and evaluate for foreign travel. No? Why? Especially if sabi natin, multinationals, and they have presence worldwide, no? So evaluate for foreign travel, no? Usually dito sa foreign travel, sino yung pupunta doon? The examiners. Okay. Number 5, the revenue officers need to prepare minutes of provision of information in connection with information relevant to the FAR analysis. 6, during the interviews, confirm the functions, contribution, participation performed by related parties regarding the related transactions, no? So, including transactions with related parties that function as intermediaries in product sale, purchase transactions, No? The revenue officers need to do research on the organizational chart, number and qualification of personnel, and financial statements of the related parties. No? So in order to confirm that these related parties have functions in the taxpayers' related party transactions. Okay. Kaya gamit na gamit niya yung organizational chart ng examiner kasi along the way, binabalik-balikan. No? Okay. Letter B, transactions of transfer of intangible assets. No? So the revenue officers need to confirm the qualifications, economic, legal ownership of the party that receives the transfer of the intangible assets. No? Considering the ability of the transferee in developing, protecting, or maintaining the intangible assets. This can be done by studying the organizational chart, number and qualifications of personnel, and financial statements of related parties. No? So these are yung nire-require ng examiner, no? Sa transfer ng intangibles. No? Confirm the qualifications, economic or legal ownership of the party that receives the transfer of the intangible assets. No? Ano pa? Consider the ability of the transferee in developing, protecting, or maintaining the intangible assets. No? Kasi baka hindi naman niya kaya. No? This can be done by studying the organizational chart, number and qualification of personnel, and financial statements of related parties. So, yung sabi ko sa inyo na maraming kakalitan talaga ang financial statements. Transactions of provision of intra-group services, the revenue officers need to confirm the qualification, no, of the party that delivers the intra-group services. This can be done by studying the organizational chart and the number and qualifications of the personnel who provides the services. Siyempre, kasi ano yon, yung intra-group services, no? So qualified ba yung personnel who provides the services? Identify and or confirm the type of assets used by the taxpayer, including land, buildings and machinery, use of valuable intangible assets, financial assets, and the nature of the assets that are used, no? Including useful life, market value, location, and legal protection available for the intangible assets. No? So yun yung pinapa-identify or pinapa-confirm, no? Kung ano yung mga type of assets used by the taxpayer. Siguro ma-relate mo na dito yung nature ng business ng taxpayer. No? Kasi kung sa type of assets used by the taxpayers, merong kasali dyan na hindi naman niya kailangan, then hindi po siya arm's length, no? Kasi bakit siya arm's length, hindi naman niya kailangan, bakit nandyan sa assets niya? Nag-invest siya ng pera para doon, no? Then matulog lang pala yung investment niya. Okay. Pagdating naman sa intangible assets, ano naman po yung consideration? How to identify? No? The company obtains a higher profitability level than the average for similar industries. No? So, hanapin mo na ngayon kung ano yung intangible assets niya. Bakit higher profitability level siya? No? The existence of intangible assets is not determined by whether or not the intangible assets are recorded in the balance sheets, no? Kasi sometimes karamihan po talaga yung intangible assets wala po sa balance sheet. No? But it is very important. Why? Kasi value drivers po siya. Ito, may example po na binigay dito. The cost in connection with the research, development, and marketing of a product are often not capitalized but instead charged as expense at the time they occur. No? This cost may not be reflected in the balance sheet as assets. No? So, pagka ganyan na yung cost hindi na reflect sa balance sheet, wala yan, unaccounted cash yan. No? The existence of intangible asset is not determined by whether or not they have legal protection. No? So, there are intangible assets talaga na wala silang protection. Intangible assets relating to the production process in the form of patents are commonly registered. No? Kasi registrable to na mga properties, no? Yung patents. While those in the form of know-how are commonly not registered, no? Because the company owning the know-how take the view that this information should be kept confidential. Kaya talagang hindi na dinidisclose yung know-how, no? Hindi pinaparegister. No? Okay. So what are the types of intangible assets and the steps to identify their existence? We have manufacturing intangibles. No? Manufacturing intangibles are generally created through research and development activities, which are risky and entail expenses, so that the developer seeks to obtain compensation for the expenditure connection with these activities and to seek profit through the sale of goods, license agreements, or service contracts. Okay. The developer of the intangible assets may engage in the research and development activities by itself or in the name of one or more members of the company group in these ways. No? So, sa intangible assets, based on a service contract in its own name or that of one or more members of the company group. And based on an agreement whereby the members involved in the joint activity will be the economic owners of the manufacturing intangibles. Okay. So, ano pa yung mga steps that should be taken by the revenue officers to identify the existence of manufacturing? Okay. Number one, perform research on contracts such as licensing contracts or sale contracts for the intangible assets. Review the FAR analysis table relating to manufacturing functions and intangible assets used that has been filled in by the taxpayer. No? Okay. Ilan pa? Shout out muna tayo. Sino nga yung sa Palawan kanina?
Si Lilin po yung pangalan.
Lilin.
Lilin.
Oh, so shout out po dyan sa Palawan kay Miss Lilin.
Wala pong nagko-comment na bago mo ngayon. Pero may viewer mo na 8 po sa Facebook.
Sa Facebook.
Sa YouTube po, 7.
Okay. So, okay, so ito na yung revenue officers need to take the following steps, no, to identify the existence of manufacturing. Okay. Number 3, check the taxpayer's organizational chart regarding manufacturing functions, K personnel, and job descriptions of K personnel. No? Okay, so, yun yung titingnan mo raw doon yung taxpayer's organizational chart. No? Okay. Conduct site visits and interview with factory managers and manufacturing engineers. No? Sino itong mga manufacturing engineers? Sila yung assign para doon sa nagmamanufacture ng product ng company. No? So, engineers to confirm whether or not there is know-how or patents used in the factory, as well as its economic benefits. No? Okay. So, yung site visits at saka interviews, ito yung piniprepare na questionnaires, no? Number 5, identify existence of unique production equipment or modification made to the production equipment that boosts quality or reduces production cost. No? Identify any changes in factory design that reduce production cost or increase in output. No? So, ano yung factory design? Reduce production cost or increase in output. So bakit importante yung factory design? Kasi binago mo, ginawa mo ng mas maayos yung factory design mo in order to maayos na yung design niya, magkakaroon na siya ngayon ng increase in the productivity. Why? Kasi in-improve mo yung design eh. Otherwise, pag hindi yan na-improve ang design, hindi din siya arm's length. Why? Because yung arm's length principle will decide, no, na ano ba yung sabi natin sa arm's length principle, no? Related party transaction should be similar or comparable sa independent party transactions, no? So sa paggawa ng factory design na binago mo siya, yung purpose mo doon magiging more efficient yung taxpayer dahil ginandahan niya yung design para ma-reduce yung production cost, no? Or increase in output. Obtain a list of patents and conduct interviews with research and development personnel or key persons related to patents to determine whether the patents are used or not, and also to determine the value of the patents, if any. The revenue officers may request the opinion of the expert regarding the value of the patents for the taxpayer. No? So, mag-hire siya ng opinion ng expert. Sino itong tinatawag na expert? Ito yung may know-how on the industry under dispute. No? So, yun yung tinatawag na opinion of expert. Conduct interview with research and development personnel to determine the company's level of success in the market power produced by its such patent. No? Marketing intangibles. What are these marketing intangibles? No? So, marketing intangibles include but are not limited to trademarks or trade names that help increase the marketing of goods and services, customers list, distribution channels, no? A unique name, a symbol or picture that the important promotional value for the product. Okay, so yun yung mga marketing intangibles. Ano yung sabi natin about intangibles? These are assets, no, or substance which has no physical attributes, but they add value to the marketing, no? In-increase nila yung capacity ng company to market its products. Okay. The value of marketing intangibles depends on several factors, including the reputation, credibility of the brand or trade name, level of quality control and continuing research, distribution and availability of the goods and services that are marketed, success of promotion cost, and so on. No? Ito yung sinasabi dito na the value of marketing intangibles. Okay. So the revenue officer should do the following steps to identify the existence of marketing intangible. Conduct research on contracts relating to licenses, substance over form. Review the FAR analysis table regarding marketing functions and intangible assets used that has been filled in by the taxpayer. No? So ano itong mga FAR analysis? The functions, assets, and risk. No? Okay, so check the taxpayer's organizational chart with regard to marketing function, key personnel, and their job description. Conduct interviews with marketing or sales personnel to identify reasons for the conduct success in the market. Identify the existence of a series of activities that add value to the transaction. Okay. Okay, saan na tayo? 81 na, okay. Explain. Okay. So check the taxpayer's organizational chart with regard to marketing functions, key personnel, and their job descriptions. No? So pag nakita mo yung organizational chart, diba bawat isa doon may nakalagay na functions, no? Sa organizational chart. And then conduct interview with marketing sales personnel to identify reasons for the product's success in the market. No? So, kailangan mo daw na interview ng mga marketing sales personnel, no? For the product success in the market. Okay. So, identify the existence of series of activities that add value to the transaction. Okay. Sample 3. Strategic planning activities in the field of marketing, advertising activity that have a long-term impact on a product, and so on. So, yun yung nakalagay po dito na strategic planning activities. No? Identify the existence of successful distribution channels that make it easy for consumers to purchase the products and or services. No? If necessary, the revenue officers may request the opinions of experts regarding the reasons for the success of the taxpayer's product in the market. Okay, so number 7. Map and or confirm the risk borne by the taxpayer in connection with the affiliated transactions. No? Kaya kung titingnan ninyo, kanina, ang daming steps na tinuturo, madugo po ang transfer pricing audit. And since napakarami niya na requirements, ano yung pinaka-importante? Documentation. No? So, map and or confirm the risk borne by the taxpayer in connection with the affiliated transactions. No? So, this can be done by, for example, studying sale or purchase contracts, identifying right-of transactions, including those for uncollectible receivables. No? Operating expenses in the form of loss from exchange rate differences. No? Warranty expense and inventory obsolescence. The revenue officers need to observe consistency between the party that bears the risk as stated in the contract and the facts and conditions in the field. No? Anong sinasabi dito? Consistency between the party that bears the risk as stated in the contract and the facts and conditions in the field. So, pag nakita mo itong ganitong sitwasyon, this is already a potential transfer pricing issues. No? Kasi, nilalagay niya dito na parang recommendation that revenue officers need to observe consistency between the party. No? Okay, so in performing FAR analysis, the revenue officers need to identify the taxpayer's contribution to the creation, development, protection, and or maintenance of the intangible assets. No? Factors that need to be considered in identifying the taxpayer's contribution include the following. So ano yung mga following na yan? Okay. Excuse me. May nanonood pa? Ilan?
Anim po sa Facebook. YouTube po. Ito.
Okay. So ano yung titingnan? The existence of research and development cost or marketing cost, no? So may research and development cost. Existence of functions relating to research and development performed by the taxpayers, no? So existence ng functions. And then letter C, existence of functions of marketing performed by the taxpayer. Existence of risk of research and development and or marketing risks that are borne by the taxpayer. Okay. Kasi ang piniperform natin dito, functions, assets, and risk analysis. No? Okay. The contributions made by the taxpayer in connection with the success of its products should receive remuneration. Yan ang arm's length. Should receive remuneration. Dapat nakatanggap siya ng bayad. Over and above the routine functions that are performed. Therefore, the reasonable range of the taxpayer's financial performance should be higher than the average for similar companies that do not have a contribution to intangible assets. Kasi audit ang pinag-uusapan natin dito no? So, sabi ko nga sa inyo talagang bubusisiin kayo ng examiner pagka na-transfer pricing audit na. Okay. So, ano tong conclusion about the characteristics of the taxpayer business? No? So, maybe in the form of toll manufacturing contract. So, manufacturing, fully fledged manufacturing, fully fledged distributor, limited risk distributor, commissionaire, commission agent, no? Service provider, or others. So in cases where there are some changes or development in the business activities that may recharacterize the taxpayer's business, the revenue officer shall determine the adjustment based on the functions performed as it shows and risk borne. Oh. Okay. Ano itong ibig sabihin ng recharacterize the taxpayer's business? No? So the revenue officer shall determine the adjustment based on the functions performed, assets used, and risk borne. Dito sa part na to ng audit, may selection siya ng transfer pricing methods, no? Kasi ano ba yung sabi natin sa inyo sa transfer pricing methods? If you have 5, no? Sa transfer pricing methods, there are 5 methods, no? So, in choosing the transfer pricing method, identifying the availability of comparables, and determining the most appropriate transfer pricing method based on facts and condition are necessary, no? So how do we choose the transfer pricing method? Identify the availability of comparables and determining the most appropriate transfer pricing method based on facts and conditions. Okay. Ito ang pinaka-madugo dyan at saka pinaka-importante sa paggawa ng transfer pricing analysis, no? Identify available comparables, no? Kasi 'di ba sabi natin sa transfer pricing kailangan mo talaga mag-compare, no? So identify available comparables. One of the important thing in choosing transfer pricing method is the availability of reliable and independent comparables. The purpose of this is to ensure availability and reliability of independent comparables to be applied. No? So comparables to be identified can be in the form of prices, data, for example, market prices for commodities, data on margin of gross profit, or data on margin or of net profit. Okay, so comparables used to test transaction of the taxpayer with the relevant party on a big group into internal comparable and external comparables. So yun yung sabi ko sa inyo, pinakamahirap pagdating na sa gagawa tayo ng analysis. Why? Because we have to identify the available comparables, and sometimes there are no available comparables. Why? Because of the very unique na activities or peculiarity in the business of the taxpayer, no? So wala kang mahanap na comparables, no? Sabi ng OECD, kung wala kang makita na comparable, so you cannot compare, no? So you just hypothesize. So ano? Hypothesize. No? Hypothesize ka, common sense ka. Kung you ask question, no? Kung hindi ba related parties ang nag-agree, Papayag ba sila doon sa condition or sa agreement na ginawa? No? Okay. Comparables used to test transactions of the taxpayer with their related parties can be grouped into internal comparables and external comparables. No? Internal comparables are obtained. No? So ito yung sample ko sa inyo na most controversial na GlaxoSmithKline. Ang ginamit nila internal comparables. No? So internal comparables are obtained when the tested party engages in sale transactions or purchases of goods, services with unrelated parties. No? So licensing of intangible property to unrelated parties, imposition of interest rates, interest payments on loans to unrelated parties and others. No? Factors that need to be confirmed in identifying reliable internal comparables includes the following. Bakit wala? Include the following. Okay, so letter A. Ensure that the internal comparables are not transactions that were performed solely to identify that the related party transactions are at arm's length. Example 4. TMD Corporation, a manufacturer of agricultural machinery, sells part of its product, 3WG, through LAC Inc., its subsidiary in country X. So in addition, TMD Corp also sells a small amount of its product, 3WG, to FEL Limited, an independent distributor in country Y. The economic conditions in country X and country Y are relatively small. Okay, so to use the sale transactions to FEL Limited as internal comparables, it must first be confirmed that these independent transactions are not performed solely to justify that the affiliated transactions are at arm's length. No? Performed solely means that the FEL Limited is not economically dependent from its transaction with TMD Corporation. Letter B, ensure that internal comparables are independent transactions performed in the normal course of business. Okay, so internal comparables. No? Example 5. At the start of the year, TMD Corporation, a manufacturer of agricultural machinery, sells product 3WG to LAC Inc., its subsidiary in country X. However, at the end of that year, TMD Corp goes bankrupt and has to liquidate its inventory by selling all its products 3WG at a liquidation price. So because this liquidation sale is not conducted under normal business conditions, the sales of TMD Corp at the time of the liquidation cannot be used as an independent comparable in determining the fair price of TMD Corporation products to LAC Inc. No? Kasi hindi siya normal na business conditions. Ensure comparability between the related party transactions and the internal comparables by considering the 5 comparability factors as enumerated in RR number 2-2013. Kaya nga, ito palagi kong binabalik-balik sa inyo, especially yung 5 comparability factors na to. Kasi, even yung OECD, no, na nag-train sa amin, they require us to memorize talaga itong 5 comparability factors. Why? Kasi every time na gumagawa ka ng transfer pricing analysis report, you will work on this always, no? At saka, pabalik-balik lang to. Apply mo to sa lahat ng transfer pricing methods, no? So, number 1, characteristics of goods and services, no? So, characteristic or nature of goods and services. Okay. So, functions, assets, and risk analysis, no? So, ito naman yung factors ng functions, assets, and risk, no? And then the contractual terms, no? Then the economic circumstances and the business strategies. No? Na-explain ko na sa inyo yan isa-isa. So what are now the example of the external comparables? Kasi kanina we have discussed the internal comparables. So what are now the external comparables? Ibig sabihin sa labas, no? Yung internal sa loob, no? Sa loob, ibig sabihin within the group. Ito, external comparables sa labas na ito, no? Okay. The external comparables that can be used to test the arm's length nature of related party transactions may be in the form of the following, but not limited to. Letter A, market price of commodity products or price of similar goods or services traded by unrelated parties, such as gold, silver, crude palm oil, coal, and other commodity products. No? So, commodity products, meaning talagang kailangan. No? Or price of similar goods, services traded by unrelated parties, such as gold, silver, crude palm oil, coal, and other commodity products. Okay, so letter B, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas offered rate para to sa mga sa interest, no, sa financial transactions. Letter C, Philippine Securities and Exchange Commission or SEC database, no? So letter D, commercial databases. Okay. Dali lang. Inom muna. Okay. So, ano tong sabi na choose the transfer pricing method that is most appropriate to the facts and conditions, no? Kaya nga case-to-case basis po ang paggawa ng transfer pricing analysis, no? So, factors that need to be considered in selecting the transfer pricing method that is most appropriate to the facts and conditions include the following. Number 1, advantages and disadvantages of each method, no? So, bawat method may advantages and may disadvantages. Or, bawat method has a strength and weakness, no? Appropriateness of the transfer pricing method to the basic nature of the transaction determined based on FAR analysis. Kaya nga appropriateness ang tinatawag dito ng methods eh. Bakit? Because kung baga sa i-compare mo siya o i-analyze mo siya based on the nature of the transactions, determined based on FAR analysis. No? Number 3, availability of reliable information in connection with independent comparables to apply the method that is chosen and or other methods. No? So, pagka may napili ka naman na transfer pricing method, dapat meron kang information or kumpleto ka ng information about that comparables. Kasi kung hindi mo rin magawa yung analysis na kailangan mong gawin, no? Level of comparability between the related party transaction and the transactions between independent parties, including reliability of adjustment made to eliminate the material influence of any differences. Kaya nga tayo adjust. Bakit? Because we want to eliminate the difference, no? So, halimbawa lang dun sa mga previous ko na examples. Halimbawa na lang pag compare ka, no? Hindi talaga siya tugma. May difference halimbawa na 100 pesos. So, doon sa 100 pesos na yun yung i-adjust mo doon sa isa to eliminate the material influence, no? Between the methods. Okay. To choose the most appropriate method in a transfer pricing case, it needs information in respect of factors of comparability on related transactions. Also in the examination process, especially information of FAR or the functions, assets, and risks ng related parties, no? So, entering into the transaction with taxpayer including related party existing abroad, no? So, sino itong mga related parties na existing sa abroad, no? Selection of tested party is carried on based on functional analysis, no? So, already prepared and reliability of data or proof information as well as facts obtained in audit, no? The revenue officer can choose taxpayer, which is being audited taxpayer, as tested party, no? So, ano itong tested parties? Ito yung i-test natin kung tama ba yung kanyang pricing, no? Okay. So, factors that require attention in choosing the tested party include the following. Bakit po ito yung ating dinidiscuss sa inyo, di ba? Dapat doon tayo sa documentation. Why? Because ito na, we have identified what are the documentation requirements na kailangan. Since ito na yung audit, ito na yung application, dito na i-apply ngayon yung documents mo na hiningi sa iyo because that was requirement for the transfer pricing documentation, no? Okay. So, the factors that require attention in choosing the tested party include the following. The tested party is generally the party that has the less complex functions. For example, the party that does not have unique, valuable, or intangible property, no? So, less complex yung functions ng tested party. If the tested party is located abroad, no? So, the revenue officer should confirm the reliability of the information regarding the tested party. For example, by requesting data, information on financial statements or other data from taxpayer and or performing an exchange of information with the competent authority in the country concerned. Kasi pagka ang information mo manggagaling sa abroad, may other country na involved, no? And if the revenue officers cannot confirm the reliability and adequacy of information of a related party located abroad that was to be tested, the revenue officers can select the taxpayer or another related party as the tested party, no? So, hindi ma-confirm ang reliability at saka adequacy ng information ng related party, no? Located abroad. So, anong gagawin? Select the taxpayer or another related party as the tested party. Huwag mo na ituloy, no? Kasi hindi siya pwede, hindi siya obra kasi nga kulang yung inadequate yung records niya, no? May nanonood pa, Hare? Ilan?
Sa Facebook po, 4 na.
Sa ano?
Sa YouTube, ma'am, 7 pa rin.
Mag-ano na eh. Magpa-5
Order na po.
Pa-5 o'clock na, uuwian na, sa bahay naman pala yung iba, no? O kaya yung iba may inaasikaso na, no? Okay. Okay. So, application of the arm's length principle or the ALP, no? Ito yung pinaka-heart na transfer pricing, the arm's length principle, no? Ano yung arm's length principle? Yung comparability, nagko-compare ka. Kaya yung comparability factors, very, very essential po yun, no? So, applying the ALP or the arm's length principle is conducted after choosing the most appropriate transfer pricing method and should consider the following. Letter A, performing comparability analysis. Audit on transfer pricing is made by comparing condition of related transactions and condition of independent transaction. So related transaction is deemed comparable with independent transaction in the event that number one, difference, if any, between condition of affiliated transaction and condition of independent transaction has no material influence to prices or profits. No? So walang material influence. Accurate, reliable adjustment can be conducted to eliminate material influence. No? So yung reliable adjustment can be conducted. Pwede kang mag-adjust para matanggal yung material influence ng difference nila. Bakit? Kasi we want them to be similar. So, kung may diferensya, pwedeng tanggalin para maging similar sila. No? Okay, so increasing scope of comparability. No? So, to compare condition in related transactions to condition of independent transactions, economically relevant characteristics of condition compared must be comparable adequately. Adequately, meaning kompleto. Di kulang yung dokumento. So that the comparison is more accurate. No? So in the event that condition of related transactions is not comparable with condition of independent transaction, then expansion of scope of comparability can be conducted by ways among other things. No? Okay. Following the data searching through the searching strategy, one or more data of company to be made as comparable will be obtained. No? However, data obtained from commercial database only constitute candidate comparable. No? Kasi pagka kumuha ka ng data or data searching ka, maraming kang sources, no? May mga strategies ka or yung iba talagang bumibili from a reliable commercial databases. No? Candidate comparable chosen must undergo manual selection process. No? Manual review, manual screening that can be decided whether the candidate comparable is used reliable or rejected. No? So with the submission of the BIR Form 1709, yung transfer pricing documentation natin to be attached in the annual income tax return, mapapadali, mapapabilis na yung trabaho ng BIR. Why? Because there is already an available information na magagamit nila to analyze, no, the docket or the data. Okay. Criteria of manual searching and selection. To generate reliable, comparable data searching in commercial database must be used right searching strategies, searching criteria, among other things. Code of industry in accordance with audited taxpayer. So we have the region, the availability of data, and indicator of financial statement. Okay. So what are the manual selection? Made by learning profile of every company, becoming candidate comparable, seeing in its website, searching information relating to the candidate, comparable in printed media or online or other methods. Okay. So, halimbawa naman, nandyan na yung mga comparables natin, marami na. No? The criteria to reject candidate comparable, among other things, are as follows. No? So the purpose of general review is to select companies that have data or information available to further testing and those that meet basic comparability requirements such as independence. Product and business activities, similarities. Okay, so the table below summarizes the general review. Ito yung general review. No? Nandiyan na nakalagay kung ano yung cases, no? Yung rejection criteria, the discussion, number of companies remaining after applying the criterion, no? Active, so reject companies that are no longer active or are dormant since they do not have economic activity. Corporate structure, reject companies that are not listed as a stock corporation. The company's legal form is either a limited or general partnership, no? So sa corporate structure. Available information. Reject companies that do not have financial information for at least 2 of the 3 years of the tested period, no? So reject the companies that do not have sufficient information based on internet research, no? So ngayon, ang dami-dami na pong internet research na magagamit natin because flooded na nga yung information sa internet, no? Halos lahat na kailangan natin na information na sa internet na, no? So it's up to us to use this information. Kaya nga ako nung nag-uumpisa pa lang talaga ako sa transfer pricing, sa internet ako kumukuha ng mga information, especially the parent company, wherein wala ka makukuha dito na information sa ECEC natin, no? Securities and Exchange Commission. So saan ako kumukuha ng information? Sa internet, especially if mayroon silang sariling website, no? Nakalagay doon yung annual financial statements nila, no? At saka yung mga hallmarks nila, at saka yung mga information nila about their operations, nandoon lahat. Especially those na listed po sa stock exchange, no? They are required to, at saka yung mga public corporations, they are required to publish their information regularly. Okay? So, product and business strategy, review the main business activity of the companies and the products that they deal with. No? Independence, reject companies that have the following, no? Companies which are owned by another by more than 25% of its total shareholder, no? Okay. Companies which have related party transactions that are more than 20% of the relevant threshold. Consecutive losses, reject companies that are not comparable due to the volatility of their profitability as evidenced or shown by consecutive years of losses incurred, no? Pero yung sabi ng OECD dito, do not outright reject comparables that are losing, no? Kasi there might be a transfer pricing issue kung bakit siya palaging losing. Yan po yung nangyari doon sa GlaxoSmithKline, no? The Canadian Revenue Agency, talagang sinubject siya sa audit yung isang product lang niya because nagtataka na sila na for how many years, napakasikat ng product, ang dami-dami bumibili. Why are they losing? No? So, yun yung titingnan natin na the industry is gaining, so why are you losing? Okay, so other rejection or reason, reject company that declared affidavit of non-operation and discontinued commercial operations, newly registered companies, or companies that have no business description or have insufficient data. No? And then we have the financial review. No? So the financial information of the remaining companies is placed under the further scrutiny to ensure that the companies perform the same functions, assets, and risk. The table below summarizes the steps, no? Okay. So rejection criteria, description, the number of companies remaining after applying the criterion, the level of revenue, no? So reject companies whose revenue level exceeds 10 times higher or lower than the tested revenue level, no? So indicating the company's scale of operations may be different from the tested party. Kaya nga, anong kinoconsider natin dito at ano yung drive out natin na gusto nating malaman, no? Yung kino-compare natin na related party at saka independent party, no? Dapat parehong-pareho sila pati sa level of revenue, no? The scale of operations, no? Okay. So level of research and development expenses. Reject companies whose ratio of research and development expenses to sales exceed 3%, no? So ratio of research and development expenses to sales exceed 3%. So malaki. Level of intangible assets to total assets. Reject companies whose ratio of intangible assets to total assets exceed 3%, no? Intangible assets to total assets. So malaki yung intangibles. Okay, so ito na yung use of multiple year data. Bakit? Kasi maganda yung multiple year data, especially dun sa mga forecasting natin, no? So to obtain a complete understanding of the facts and circumstances surrounding a controlled transaction, it is useful to examine from both the years after the year after examination and the prior years. Kasi yung trend makikita mo, and then the information, no? The flow. The use of data from past years will show whether a taxpayer's reported loss on a transaction is part of a history of losses on similar transactions, no? A result of a particular economic condition in a prior year that caused an increase in cost in the subsequent year, or a reflection of the fact that a product is at the end of its life cycle, no? Kaya makikita mo na kung patapos na yung life ng product. Okay. Use of interquartile range, no? Kasi may range yung kung ano man yung ginagamit natin sa pag-compare, no? So in some case, it will be possible to apply the arm's length principle to arrive at a single figure, price or margin. That is the most reliable to establish whether the conditions of a transactions are at arm's length. No? However, because transfer pricing is not an exact science, no? Transfer pricing is not an exact science. There will be many occasions when the application of the most appropriate method or methods produces a range of figures, all of which are relatively equally reliable. No? This is often the case in practice where the comparables are extracted from a database, no? Kasi ako, bumibili din ako ng sarili kong information na may sa mga databases in order na meron ka ng pagpipilian o pag naghanap ka ng comparables mo, no? In such cases, if the range includes a sizable number of observations, statistical tools that take account of central tendency to narrow the range, no, the interquartile range or other percentiles, might help to enhance the reliability of the analysis, no? So dito sa transfer pricing team, in this particular work, kasama na dito yung statistician, no? Kanya na to. The end result of the financial data analysis after performing FAR of the selected comparables are summarized in an interquartile range, no? So the median is the midpoint of the interquartile range. The median will generally produce a different result to the average of the range being considered. Okay. If these cases, differences in the figures that comprise the range may be caused by the fact that, in general, the application of the arm's length principles only produces an approximation of conditions that would have been established between independent enterprises. No? So it is also possible that the different points in a range represent the fact that independent enterprises engaged in comparable transactions under comparable circumstances may not establish exactly the same price for the transaction. Kaya nga doon natin hinahanap yung difference eh. O, kasi talagang hindi sila pareho. So hinahanap natin, ina-account natin. So it may also be the case that while every effort has been made to exclude points that have a lesser degree of comparability, what is arrived at is a range of figures, no, for which it is considered. Given the process used for selecting comparables and limitations in information available on comparables, that some comparability defects remain that cannot be identified and or quantified and are therefore not adjusted. So, nagawa mo na lahat, pero there are still defect, no? Hindi mo pa rin ma-identify, hindi mo ma-quantify. So, hindi mo ma-adjust. So, in that case, hindi successful yung ginawa mo na comparability analysis, no? So, if the relevant conditions of the control transactions, price or margin, are within the arm's length range, no adjustment should be made, no? No adjustment should be made. Kasi within the arm's length range sila. So, kung walang within the arm's length sila, hindi ka na mag-adjust. Kasi, ibig sabihin, nasa range sila na meron mang konting difference, pero tolerable na. No? If the relevant conditions of the control transactions, price or margin, fall outside the arm's length range asserted by the BAR, then the taxpayer should have the opportunity to present arguments that the conditions of the control transaction satisfy the arm's length principle and that the result falls within the arm's length range. No? That the arm's length range is different from the one asserted by the BAR. No? Okay. So, if the taxpayer is unable to establish this fact, the BAR must determine the point within the arm's length range to which it will adjust the conditions of the control transaction. So the BAR hindi niya may establish yung fact, no? So, i-determine niya ngayon yung point na arm's length range to which it will adjust the conditions of the control transactions. No? Naalala ko dito yung panahon pa ni Assistant Commissioner Valeroso na gumawa po siya ng sarili niya na benchmark between different kind of industry for its region, no? 3 region lang yung nagawa niya, yung Caloocan, tapos Manila, Quezon City, Makati, so 4. Gumawa siya ng benchmark. Okay. So, doon na tayo sa comparability adjustment, no? So, itong comparability adjustments, mahaba-haba to kasi marami pa tong mga factors, no? Or data or information na kailangan. Pero, hindi ka pwedeng makapaggawa ng comparability adjustments kung hindi mo muna unahin yung information mo and then applying the comparability factors. Sa pag-comply po ng comparability factors or sa pag-analyze ng comparability factors, napaka-importante po ng documentation. That's why our topic for this live streaming po natin sa transfer pricing, sa basic transfer pricing Philippines po natin, we deal with the documentation requirements of transfer pricing. Why? Kasi dito nakasalalay sa documentation yung accuracy ng transfer pricing analysis report natin. In some cases, no, sa mga jurisdiction na decision na ng court in some other countries in transfer pricing, na giging dispute sa kanila itong lack of documentation, no? Kasi pagka hindi mo ma-document din, hindi mo ma-prove na yung pricing mo is proper, no? And in some cases, no, in some courts, kagaya dun sa GlaxoSmithKline na case, merong gumawa yung GlaxoSmithKline ng sarili niyang transfer pricing analysis, gumawa din ang CRA ng transfer pricing analysis niya using different comparables. So, iba yung comparable na ginamit ng tax authority, iba din yung comparable na ginamit ng taxpayer, no? So, it's up to the court to decide kung sino ang tama sa kanila. And also, both of them hire industry experts, no? So, labanan yun sa korte. So, sino ang magwawagi? Yung may documentation. That's why meron tayong lessons learned from the case of singer, actress, Claire de la Puente. Ano yung lessons learned natin doon? The importance of documentation. Because walang evidentiary value yung iyong allegations, no? Yung mga sinasabi mo kung wala kang dokumento na ipapakita, no? So in the case of Miss Claire de la Puente, ano yung po yung nangyari doon? Sabi ni Miss Claire de la Puente, hindi siya nag-file ng mga returns with the BIR, hindi siya nagpa-register ng mga bases because wala daw operations, no? Pero ano nung pinakita ng BIR at ng LTO? Meron siyang operations. Why? Kasi yung 237 buses niya, nagbabiyahe, nahuhuli ba ng mga enforcers, may report sa LTO, no? At saka ano pa yung mga report doon? Meron siyang 19 franchises na during the deliberation, during the hearing, siya pa yung uma-attend, siya din yung nagre-represent sa companies, no? So, allegations lang yung sinasabi niya na walang operations. And the other party has documents to prove na merong operations. So, anong nangyari sa kanya? Convicted siya of 7 counts of criminal charges. Charged against her by the BIR. So, sa transfer pricing, ganun din. Documentations are very important, no? Labanan yan sa korte. Kaya, pagdating na sa court, in the case of GlaxoSmithKline, anong ginawa ng korte doon? Very conservative din po yung kanilang, very friendly yung kanilang decision. Why? Because yung findings nila na difference is 600 to 6,000, no? Na mga na difference dun sa price ng active ingredients ng Santa. Ano lang ginawa ng court? Adjust at $25 lang per kilo, no? So, very conservative siya. Sa pinaka-minimum na difference doon sa findings, sa comparables, 600 per kilo, na ang difference. Pina-adjust lang ng court ng 25. No? So, nagbayad na yung nagbayad na ang GlaxoSmithKline ng 3 billion, 3.1 billion. Kasi, instead na mag-dispute pa siya, very conservative naman ang verdict or judgment ng court on the case, no? So, transfer pricing documentation is very important, especially now that there is already a massive transfer pricing audit na ginagawa ng BIR because na-trigger din po ito doon sa transfer pricing case na binabato ngayon sa ABS-CBN, no? Ang dami niyang issues on the transfer pricing. And nakagawa na rin ang BIR ng kanyang transfer pricing audit guidelines. And recently, itong ang BIR Form 1709, the attachment of the documentation requirements sa annual income tax return, no? So, ito na talaga, nandito na yung transfer pricing that matagal nang ginagawa ng ibang bansa, tayo ngayon pa lang. That's why we are going to prepare for this documentation requirements. That is very, very important, no? So, itong comparability adjustment, so we will discuss sa susunod na naman natin na live streaming, no? Right now kasi sinisingit lang namin yung aming live streaming dito sa may mga nakasalang na po kasi tayo na ibang schedule, no? Kaya stay tuned na lang po. Bibigay kami sa inyo siguro ng stable na schedule later, kasi right now so unstable pa yung ating kondisyon, no? Kaya stay tuned. Although yung tax training natin every Tuesday and Thursday, yun talagang naka-fix na siya, no? So ito na lang sa ating transfer pricing, hindi pa natin ma-fix dahil sinisingit lang natin sa ating mga schedule, no? Sa tinitingnan natin kung saan siya mag-fit in na time, no? Okay. So with that, I would like to say thank you, and please subscribe to our channel, no? So for more information about transfer pricing. Thank you and good day.